Hello, am I audible to you?
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay. So let's
Sir,
start now. Okay, so welcome to that's MEG-5 Literary Criticism and Theory, Block 3. And already it is known to all of you. Topic is romantic criticism. Topic is romantic criticism. Already two completed. On the very first day, that an introduction block one, and last class also was about to critical, that's criticism, classical criticism. So today to start, romantic criticism. So you are lucky enough because just prior to that, the supply of electricity disrupted, interrupted just now came. Otherwise, you would not have met today. Well, so to start now, so as usual, that's also it's a very vast topic. But time is that's the duration is 2 hours. So impossible, but we have to make it possible. Just coming in contact with some points in a nutshell. Nutshell means so in this unit we come across these points to be discussed also today. Uh, what is romanticism? That's a very vast meaning expression. Then Wordsworth preface to lyrical ballads. Then Coleridge's Biographia Literaria, and P.B. Shelley's A Defense of Poetry. Okay, so these are the main points that should be taken into consideration, and accordingly also to start. So now to know that is some important points, important uh, subparts. What we call it as the subparts, 10 points of romantic criticism. That's very, very necessary. Unless until you know all this, you can't have a clear cut idea. Okay, so to expand this, just I am presenting for you. So that's just listen now. That's what is romanticism? The very first point. As discussion is about romantic criticism, if anyone is asking you, please define romanticism, or what's your own idea about romanticism, or what do you mean by romanticism? At least about 2 to 3 lines you have to explain. So listen mindfully. Romanticism was a literary movement. Romanticism was a literary movement that emphasized individualism, and emotion. Means it speaks about these two things, that individualism and emotion. The romantic era lasted from the end of the 18th century. So it lasted from the end of the 18th century to the middle of the 19th century, but the effects are still evident throughout modern literature. Throughout modern literature. Romantic works, romantic works were a reaction, romantic works were a reaction to the age of enlightenment and the advancing industrial age, a time in which science and nationalization began to take firmer hold in the public consciousness. Romantic literature challenged this new wave of ideas by telling stories rooted in emotions, nature, idealism, and the subjective experiences of common men and women. It is important to note that Romanticism as a literary movement is not the same thing as the literary genre of romance novels. Romanticism may be an influence on today's romance novels, but romance novels do not typically possess all the elements central to romantic era of literature. So, also the term romantic doesn't refer directly to romantic love. It comes from the medieval French romance, the term for an epic chival's quest told in verse. So now to know what are the themes of romantic criticism. What are the themes of romantic criticism? The four major themes of romantic criticism are the four major romantic that major themes of romantic criticism are emotion and imagination, nature and the social class. Understand? So there are four major themes of romantic criticism. One that's is emotion and imagination, because you have to be imaginative as well as emotional also. Then nature and the social class. So who is the father of romantic criticism? It's already known to all of you. Robert Burns is considered the pioneer of the romantic movement. Robert Burns is considered the pioneer, means the trendsetter of the romantic movement. Then who are the first romantic poet? Because there are two categories. One, that's the first is first generation romantic poets, and the second generation romantic poets. You get me? So who are regarded as the first generation romantic poets? As you know that the pioneer of romantic criticism is Robert Burns, but who are the first romantic writer? The very first romantic writer, and they're also regarded as the first
Wordsworth.
hello.
Wordsworth.
Just I'm telling who are the first romantic writers, that Blake means William Blake, Wordsworth, and
PB
Coleridge.
Shelley. PB Shelley.
Now PV Shelley is coming the second generation, second generation romantics. For the first generation romantics, so these three persons are coming under this category. Blake, Wordsworth, and Coleridge were first generation romantics. Remember, Blake, Wordsworth, and Coleridge were first generation romantics. But then the second generation romantics, such as Byron, Shelley, uh, and Keats. Okay, so the first generation romantics were Blake, Wordsworth, and Coleridge, and the second generation romantic means after them they came. After these persons or famous poets, they came. That's why they are regarded as the second generation romantics. So who are they? They are Byron, that's Lord Byron, P.B. Shelley, and John Keats. Okay, so now you knew they belong to two categories. First generation, Blake, Wordsworth, and Coleridge. Second generation, that's Byron, Shelley, and Keats. So then next, what is romantic theory of literature or characteristics of romanticism? Two to three lines only, not more than that. What is romantic theory of literature? As you know, the cyclonic storm is coming. So tomorrow it may hit the shore of Puri and also can Bay of Bengal. So today, fortunately, light had gone out, but just before 10 minutes, just the supply of light came. That's why we were able to have a chit chat. If tomorrow the same things are happening, we may take or may not take. Okay, tomorrow, not today. Today, anyhow, we can adjust. So, what is romantic theory of literature or characteristics of romanticism? Romanticism, romantic literature is marked by six primary characteristics. As earlier you just knew, So that themes of romantic criticism. So there are four major themes of romantic criticism. That's emotion and imagination, nature and social class. So here also the same, but in a different state. Uh, that's romantic literature is marked by six primary characteristics. So what are the six primary characteristics? The celebration of nature, celebration of nature because they like nature. They want to just do many things about nature. Celebration of nature. Then focus on the individual and the spirituality. Focus on the because social class. So social class means individual and spirituality. Then celebration of isolation and melancholy. Then interest in the common man. Then idealization of women and personification and pathetic fallacy. Okay. So
Can you
famous,
repeat, sir?
that's again repeat. Will I repeat again? Okay. Uh, Romantic literature is marked by six primary characteristics: celebration of nature, focus on the individual and the spirituality, then celebration of isolation. They like to write romantic poets sitting in isolated places or isolation, isolated places, and melancholy, then interest in the common man, then idealization of women, and personification of pathetic fallacy. And as you know that the famous romantic poets are Wordsworth, Coleridge, Byron, and Shelley. So they are regarded as the famous romantic poets. But just I categorize taking that some of them coming under first generation and some among them coming second generation. But actually the famous and reputed personalities are Wordsworth, Coleridge, Byron, and Shelley. Today also we have to know something about these four important persons or poets. So, what is the symbol of romanticism? It's already known to all of you. What is the symbol of romanticism? Nowadays, a blue flower was a central symbol of inspiration for the romanticism. Schism movement. A blue flower was a central of uh, was a central symbol of inspiration for the romanticism movement and remains an enduring motifs. Motifs means a decorative image or a design, especially a repeated one forming a pattern. So that is and remains an enduring motifs in Western art today. It stands for desire, love, and metaphysical striving for the infinite and unreachable. And already you know that. So it is concerned with the expression of the individual's feelings and emotions. So it is the artistic movement. Romanticism is the artistic movement of the 18th and 19th centuries, which was concerned with the expression of the individual's feelings and emotions. Okay, feelings and emotions. Or we may call it as imaginations, nature and social class. Okay, we find these characteristics or features in romantic criticism or romantic poetry. So now the history of romanticism. Some few lines, not 4 to 5 lines. Then after we have to pass on to the important that Wordsworth, Coleridge, Byron, and Shelley, if time permits. So systematically, and orderly to start and end. So, history of Romanticism. Romantic literature emerged at a time when the world was undergoing a sea change of thoughts and ideas. The age of enlightenment produced a new breed of philosophers and scientists who challenged long held ideas about how human thoughts lived and came to be. The Industrial Revolution, quite naturally, was hot on the heels of Enlightenment. The ideas and theories formed in the latter and now came to life in exciting new inventions that changed the way people lived and worked. So that Romanticism began in Great Britain. Understand that Romanticism it began in Great Britain with the emergence of poets like Wordsworth, S.T. Coleridge, Lord Byron, and P.B. Shelley. So the first emerging poets of Romanticism. But it at first began in Great Britain with the emergence of poets like Wordsworth, Coleridge, Byron, and Shelley. Okay. So now new you just knew many sub points about romantic criticism or romantic poetry. So the founding father of the pioneers or the first generation romantic, the second generation romantics, and the key features of romanticism, and the symbol of romanticism. Okay. And many more about that's romanticism. So now let's start. And also the characteristics of romanticism. The key characteristics of romanticism are emotion and intensity, imagination and a focus on the individual as well as nature and human emotion. Okay. So now to start, the very first the prime discussion of today's topic, as earlier I told to you, so we here come across four important persons: Wordsworth, Byron, Keats, and Shelley. So now, to begin with, we have to know a lot about Wordsworth. Wordsworth preface to lyrical ballads. Wordsworth preface to lyrical ballads. Some lines are there, so listen. Then after we have to switch over to Coleridge writings and some lines about Coleridge. Then the rest, that Byron and Shelley. So now, Wordsworth preface to lyrical ballads. Wordsworth preface to lyrical ballads. So the preface to lyrical ballads is an essay. So it's an essay composed by Williams Wordsworth for the second edition published in 1800 are the poetry collection Lyrical Ballads. So it is an extract from the Lyrical Ballads, poetry collection Lyrical Ballads, and then greatly expanded in the third edition of 1802. At first 1800 poet collection Lyrical Ballads, it came from the poet collections of Wordsworth Lyrical Ballads, preface to Lyrical Ballads. So it's an essay composed by William Wordsworth, and then greatly expanded in the third edition of 1902. It has come to be seen as it has come to be seen as de facto manifesto of the Romantic movement. De facto means de facto. That you know, de facto manifest. De facto means, in fact, whether by right or not. In fact, whether by right or not. Existing or holding, de facto means existing or holding a specified position, in fact, but not necessarily by legal right. Existing or holding a specified position, in fact, but not necessarily by legal right. So that is, uh, it has come to be seen as de facto manifesto. And manifesto, a public declaration of a policy and aims. Means policy statement. Manifesto means policy statement. A public declaration of a policy and aims means policy statement. So it has come to be seen as de facto manifesto of the Romantic movement. The four guidelines of the manifesto include. So what do we find in that? What sort of prefers to lyrical ballads, which is known as de facto manifesto. Now, the four guidelines of the manifesto include. So, some important lines are there, which that we come across in what sort of manifesto means declaration of the policy. A manifesto means a public declaration of policy and aims, or policy statement. Policy statement. So, how do we find in that manifesto or public declaration of our sort? One, ordinary life is the best subject for poetry. In that essay, preface to lyrical ballads, in that essay, preface to lyrical ballads, we come across the number one, and that declaration: ordinary life is the best subject for poetry. Wordsworth uses common man's language. Means here Wordsworth here uses ordinary life is the best subject for poetry. Means here Wordsworth uses common man's language that can be understood by one and all. Then everyday language is best suited for poetry. Everyday language. Then three, these are the declarations. These are the declarations, public declarations in Wordsworth manifesto. So these are the guidelines that Wordsworth has stated. Everyday language is best suited for poetry. Then expressions of feelings. Expressions of feelings is more important than plot. Expressions of feelings is more important than plot or action. Okay, than plot or action. So feelings that he has given much more importance than plot or action. So it was also one declaration or statement of Wordsworth. Then poetry is the spontaneous last manifesto means last declaration or guideline about poetry. Poetry is the spontaneous overflow of emotion. As you know, poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings collected in tranquility. Okay, so here Wordsworth speaks poetry is the spontaneous overflow of emotion that takes its origin from emotion recollected in tranquility. It is by so these are the four guidelines that we see in uh, Wordsworth manifesto means public declaration. Wordsworth preface to lyrical ballads declares the dawn of English Romantic movement. Okay, Wordsworth preface to lyrical ballads declares the dawn. Dawn, you know, DAWN, dawn and dusk. Dawn means the beginning, at the very starting of the day, whenever sunrise fall on this earth. Okay, dawn and its opposite is dusk. That's the approaching of the evening, or when, or we call when the sun fades. Okay, starts to sink down. So that is Wordsworth and Wordsworth's preface to lyrical ballads declares the dawn of English Romantic movement. In the beginning, Wordsworth and Coleridge, with the publication of the lyrical ballads, both both jointly uh, shared and also mm, expressed their expressions in lyrical ballads, because it's the collection of the poem lyrical ballad. The preface to lyrical ballad is an essay composed by William Wordsworth by the second edition published in 1800 of the poetry collection lyrical ballads. So that is Coleridge, Wordsworth and Coleridge, with the publication of the lyrical ballads, break away with the neoclassical tendencies in poetry. As the reading people are not familiar with the new type of poetry, Wordsworth puts forward a preface to this book. In his preface, he tells us about the form and contents of this new type of poetry. So, how to start a poetry, and how can we just write a poetry, and what type of words and expressions that we have to just infuse in poetry. Everything that you just knew now about the declaration or policy statement 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Ordinary life and the language must be common. It should be understood by one and all. And everyday language, day-to-day language, not in bombastic words or difficult words that others may not understand it. So very lucid and easy to understand also. Then that's Wordsworth in the beginning states the necessity of bringing about Wordsworth in the beginning states the necessity of bringing about a revolution in the realm of poetry, as the Augustan poetry has become clear. He painfully notices that the 18th century poets have separated poetry from the group of common people. Who Wordsworth, Wordsworth painfully notices, means very sadly finds that the 18th century poets have separated poetry from the grasp of common people. 18th century, because poetry collection 18th century, and then 1802, that the third edition. So Wordsworth saw that the 18th century poets have separated poetry from the grasp of common people. Means it was completely unable on the part of the common people to understand that. To understand that. So he resolves to live to liberate this poetry from the cycles of so-called classical doctrines. So he resolves, means thought to liberate this poetry from the cycles of so-called classical doctrines. He, in collaboration with his friend Coleridge, Okay, so he extended his hands with his most important friend Coleridge, and both in a joint venture, jointly, okay, went on writing everything. So he, in collaboration with his friend Coleridge, begins to write poems for the people of all classes. Because at the very beginning or in the beginning of 1800, so Wordsworth found that the language of poetry is very hard. Ordinary people cannot understand it. It's very tough, beyond their imagination and thought. So he, in collaboration with Coleridge, not only he just thought and wrote, he also invited his friend Coleridge, and both shared their views and started writing uh, the poetry. So that's for the people of all classes. Wordsworth thinks that Wordsworth thinks that the language of Augustan poetry is highly artificial and sophisticated. Augustan poetry. As earlier I told Augustan poetry, I also told what is Augustan poetry, because beginning of about that's Wordsworth in the beginning states the necessity of bringing about the revolution in the realm of poetry at the Augustan poetry. Okay, Augustan poetry means perhaps it was very difficult at the start of the 1800th century. So uh, Wordsworth thinks that the language of Augustan poetry is highly artificial and sophisticated. That is why he suggests a new language for romantic poetry. Okay, so whenever Wordsworth came to know that the language of the poet is very difficult, impossible on the for the ordinary man to understand, so he, in collaboration with Coleridge, uh, again made up their mind, sharing everything, started writing a new form of poetry, means new type of language was being introduced by the both Coleridge and Wordsworth for romantic poetry. That's why he suggests a new language for romantic poetry, which can be understood by all, even ordinary people. So, what is that new type of language? One, to make poetry lifelike. To make poetry lifelike. Understand lifelike. As if it has, as if it is real, as if it has a life, as if it has a life. As you all have life, and you want to feel, you want to talk and work, you want to do everything, you want to experience everything, you can share everything. So Wordsworth wrote poetry in such a manner that to make poetry lifelike, he wants to use the language of common people as the common people. He wants to use the language of common people as the common people express their feelings genuinely. You might have met some common people, very flawless people. Common people means flawless people. They do not have any flaws, or they never commit any type of mistakes. So they are very genuine, so to say. They are very genuine. Okay, very genuine persons. Uh, so that is that is to make poetry lifelike means he wants to use language of common people as the common people express their feelings very genuinely, devoid from hypocrisy. Unfeignedly. Unfeignedly means not feigned or hypocritical, genuine and sincere. Okay, their feelings were sincere, genuine. and unfeigned. UNAFIGNED, unfeigned. So he will purify the language of rustic people until it is real for use. So he will purify the language of rustic means village people, village people, rustic people, town down vibes, those who are remaining away from the town. Okay. So he will purify the language of rustic people until it is real, until it is ready for use. Okay. He means both in joint venture started to write the language in such a way that others can grasp it. Others can means the ordinary people or the rustic people means ordinary people, country people can use it. Then two, Wordsworth sees his lyrical ballads as because that preface to lyrical ballads is coming under Wordsworth collection of poems, lyrical ballad. That preface to lyrical ballads is coming under Wordsworth collection of poems, lyrical ballads. Wordsworth sees his lyrical ballads as innovative, means preface to lyrical ballads. That preface to lyrical ballads sees his lyrical ballads as innovative and connected to a high level of truth and significance, if not a high level of life and society. Then third, in English literature, Augustan poetry is a branch of Augustan literature and refers to the poetry of the 18th century, beginning of the 1800 18th century, specifically the first half of the century. The term comes from most originally from a term that George had used for himself. He saw himself as an Augustus. Augustan means of a relating to or characteristics of the neoclassical period in England. Augustine means that of relating to or characteristics of the neoclassical period in England. Okay, so many things are there. If we just focus on that particular, we can't go to discuss others. So that is all about Wordsworth preface to lyrical ballads. Means he both Wordsworth and Coleridge in that joint venture made up their mind to write the poem in such a manner that should be understood by one and all. Those are living, those are the town vibes. Okay, town down vibes. The persons living in town down vibes means are from the city also can understand it very swiftly and okay. So uh, that was about Wordsworth preface to lyrical ballads. So now to start, Coleridge Biographia Literaria. Coleridge. So what did you learn from that Wordsworth preface to means he brought some changes. Here Wordsworth, not only Wordsworth but also Coleridge both shared their views and brought a complete change, a drastic change in poetry, in the form of poetry. Prior to that, means before them, it was very difficult uh, for the common people, ordinary people, rustic people. But they thought and did something new, changing the previous pattern and adding some lines of their own, which should be understood by one and all without any hesitation, without any uh, mistake. or problems or hindrances means flawless, which can be understood by one. So flawless writings, and almost all the people of down vibes can understand, can feel their sentiments, uh, and will be happy. After they will be happy just going through all that expressions expressed in their poems. Now, Collins' Biographia Literaria. Also, in nutshell, in one page, already I have collected some important lines about Collins' Biographia Literaria. Okay, so Collins' Biographia Literaria. Collins himself, so listening? Are you listening?
Yes, sir.
Hello? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Mm. So tomorrow you see, tomorrow we may not meet because if the same situation will prevail as today, just 10 minutes before the commencement of the class, so we can't meet. We can means we can take because tomorrow it's hitting the coast, okay, coastal areas. So if we can't otherwise, we can take tomorrow. Tomorrow evening also have another block, that is block 4. If the same situation will prevail, continue, we cannot meet and eat also. We cannot meet and eat. So in the break you are eating. Also I am drinking water. That is eating. And meeting means chit chat is going on, gossiping is going on. Okay, that is meeting and eating. Well, so Coleridge himself, uh, Coleridge himself described Biographia Literaria as an immethodical miscellany. Miscellany means a group or collection of different items. That is a mixture. Miscellany means mixture, blend of many things. So Coleridge himself regarded Biographia Literaria Coleridge himself described Coleridge himself uh, described his writing biography literature as an immethodical, means not based on method, immethodical miscellany of life and opinions. In 1906, the poet Arthur Symons called the work in 1906. Another poet, Arthur Symons, called the work the greatest book of criticism in English. Okay, that uh, man, Arthur Simon, called the work the greatest book of criticism in English and one of the most annoying books in any language. So, Biographia Literaria was the most important work of literary criticism of the English Romantic period, combining philosophy and literary criticism in a new way, and it was lastingly influential. Till the end, it was influential. Till the end, it was. So, Biography Literaria was the most important work of literary criticism of the English Romantic period, combining philosophy and literary criticism in a new way, and it was lastingly influential till the end. Biographia Literaria opens with the recollection. Biographia Literaria opens with the recollection college education at Crest Hospital Grammar School, because he was studying there in that Crest Hospital Grammar School, and that time uh, it was published. So, grammar school and the influence of contemporary writers on developing minds. Coleridge divided the concept of imagination into primary and secondary. Coleridge divided the concept of imagination into primary and secondary. By primary imagination, he refers to our basic mental capacity to see and organize stimuli from world around. Okay, so by primary imagination, he refers to our basic mental capacity to see and organize stimuli from the world around us. The difference between imagination and fancy, the difference between imagination and fancy, according to Coleridge, is one of the kind rather than degree. During the during the 17th century, the term imagination and fancy had almost been used in a synonymous sense. In a synonymous sense. The 18th century accorded a superior sense first to one term and then to the other. But finally, by the end of the century, imagination came to be firmly established as the superior term. Coleridge asserts that Milton had a highly imaginative, Cowley a very fanciful mind. Okay, So imaginative means if he compares that imagination and fancy, so Coleridge, if we think of imagination and fancy, Coleridge gives much more importance to imagination because he firmly established as the superior term in comparison to fancy. In Biographia Literaria, Coleridge comments in Biographia Literaria, Coleridge comments that the difference between fancy and imagination, Coleridge comments that the difference between fancy and imagination is the same as the difference between a mechanical mixture and a chemical mixture. Okay, you just take so after 2 3 minutes again. I'm coming, taking some water. Just wait.
Can anyone please tell the last line?
Ankita, it is Coleridge comments that the difference between fancy and imagination is the same as mechanical and chemical mixture. This is the last line.
Okay, thank you.
Well, so now to start, uh, biography literary contains the first instance of the phrase suspension of disbelief. Biography literaria contains the first instance of the phrase suspense of disbelief. The biography literaria is a work on literary aesthetics, is a work on literary aesthetics or literary theory. So it is a work of great value, but it too suffers from the usual faults of Coleridge. As we find some faults or odds and oddities or lacunas in Coleridge's poetry also the same, here we just face. As its name signifies, it pretends to be a record of the poet's literary upbringing, but there is little consecutive narrative. There is too much of philosophy and too many side issues and digressions. Too many side issues and digressions. After 16th chapter of philosophizing almost entirely irrelevant, he discusses the poetical theory of his friend Wordsworth, and then in the last 7 chapters of the book, he gives a remarkable deconstruction of his critical powers. And then in the last 7 chapters of the book, he gives a remarkable demonstration of his critical powers. He analyzes the Wordsworthian theory in a masterly fashion and separately the good from the bad upon the sounder elements bases a critical dogma of great and permanent value. So these last chapters of the book, which are the most enduring exposition of the romantic theory as it exists in English. So, Collins' main Collins' main attribution to literary criticism, Collins' main contribution to literary criticism is his theory of imagination. He is most apt interpreter of romantic poetry, in which imagination played the supreme act. As earlier I told, so fancy and imagination, he gives much more importance to imagination. Uh, Played the supreme act. In Biographia Literaria, he asserts that he felt little sympathy for the writings of Pope and his followers or the school of French poetry. Coleridge's final definition of imagination, Coleridge's final definition of imagination and fancy occurs at the close of chapter of the Biographia Literaria. At the close of the chapter, according to him, there are primary and secondary imaginations. There are two types of imaginations: primary and secondary imaginations. The primary imagination hold to be the living power and prime agent of all perception, and as a repetition in the finite mind of the eternal act of creation in the infinite. The secondary imagination is an echo of the former, coexisting with the conscious will, yet still as identical with the primary in the kinds of its agency and differing only in degree. So many things are there. Just I'm coming to an end. Commenting on the distinction between fancy and imagination, commenting on the distinction between fancy and imagination, he writes in the uh, table talk, thus, you may conceive the difference in kind between the fancy. You may conceive the difference in kind between the and fancy and the imagination in this way, that if the check of the senses and the reason were withdrawn, the first would become delirium and the last mania. I mean, both will be mad. In the following memorable, okay, so now person two, that is P.B. Shelley's defense of poetry. P.B. Shelley's defense of poetry. So some lines about Shelley. One of the most well-known English romantic poets, one of the most well-known English romantic poets and a master of lyrical poetry in the English language is P.B. Shelley, Percy Bysshe Shelley. He was born in England on August 14th, 1792. Shelley had extremely radical social and political beliefs, which set him apart from the accepted societal norms. He consequently did not become well known while he was alive. However, after his passing, means after his sad demise, death, Shelley's poems received more attention. The Romantic era, an artistic, literary, musical, and intellectual movement that began in Europe at the end of the 18th century, is known for its poetry. It lasted roughly from the 1800 to 1850 and involved a backlash against the 18th century principles of the Enlightenment. So that law of nature and what are the characteristics characteristics of Shelley's poetry or features of Shelley's poetry? That love of nature, imagination, melancholy, supernaturalism, beauty, idealism, and subjectivity are the main romantic themes found throughout Shelley's poetry. Okay, so these are the romantic themes that we find in throughout Shelley's poetry. So, what is love of nature? Shelley was a passionate admirer of nature. Shelley was a passionate admirer of nature, just like the other romantic writers. Shelley, like Wordsworth, sees nature as one spirit, the supreme power acting upon everything. So the majority of his poems, including the cloud, to a skylark, to the moon, or to the west wind. So these are the writings, okay, of Shelley, and a dream of the unknown. Glorify nature as their central theme. So we come across in all these poems the most that central theme of all these poems is nature. He never gives colors to the things in nature. Instead, he describes them as they are. Understand? He never becomes superficial or hypocritical. That what is there? Okay, he just go on writing all this as usual. What is there? What is present there? Everything in the nature. So watching the flora and fauna of nature, he goes on writing. Nothing more than the required, or that less than the required. So by personifying them, he gives them human life. As you know, personifications. So the that uh, non-living beings just try to speak in such a way or exhibit in such a way that we feel as if they have life, are just like human beings. They are just like human beings. Sure, by personifying them, he gives them human life. What he does, show unwittingly seems uh, so that is love of nature. Love of nature, where nature plays an important role, and we all find what nature in almost all his poems. Then imagination. Romantic poets are known for their emphasis on the quality of imagination. Romantic poets are known for their emphasis on the quality of imagination. According to Shelley, we don't wish to know facts in poetry, history, people's personal lives, satire or satire. They are they are the many distractions and random points on which we rely and to which we apply those delicate and fleeting mental hues that language communicates. Poetry, according to Shelley, Poetry, according to Shelley, is the manifestation of imagination. Poet, uh, poetry, according to Shelley, is the manifestation of imagination because it brings disparate elements, means two discordant elements together harmoniously rather than dividing them through analysis. Then also we have a lot of cat as earlier I told. So uh, Shelley's poetry revolves around many characteristics that love of nature, imagination, melancholy, supernaturalism. So many things are there. So now you know about love of nature, imagination, then melancholy. Okay, then supernaturalism, Hellenism, beauty, all these. So these are the points to be discussed that the features or characteristics in Shelley's poetry of, of Shelley's. So what is melancholy in 2 to 3 lines? Melancholy means sad emotions. Melancholy means sad emotions. Is a prominent theme in romantic poetry because it served as a key source of inspiration for the romantic authors. Even though Shelley believed in the spirituality of humanity and was a man of hope and optimism, he portrays himself in his poems as a man of bad luck who is subject to evil and pain. Then supernaturalism. Most romantic poets included supernatural themes in their works. The supernatural is a recurring theme in Shelley's writing. His poems use of ghosts and spirits. In almost all his poems, we find these words that the ghost and the spirits raises the prospect of seeing a world other than our own. Okay, so means supernatural ghost and spirits. In almost all his poems, we come across the ghost and spirits. Then beauty. Another romantic element in Shelley's poetry is beauty. For Shelley, what he refers to as intellectual beauty. Here, beauty means that states intellectual beauty. Is beauty as an ideal and a smaller version of the beauty of nature. Oh, okay, needless to go to all this. So now to know the most important, that is defense of poetry. So now you knew some lines about Shelley and you know the Shelley's romantic or the elements or the features that we find in Shelley's romantic poetry. These are the elements. And now defense of poetry. A defense of poetry, a defense of poetry is an unfinished essay by P.B. Shelley. It's an unfinished essay by P.B. Shelley, written in February and March of 1821, that the poet put aside means that is ignore, that the poet puts aside and never completed. So that's why it's an unfinished essay by Shelley in February, written in February and March of 21, March of 1821, that the poet pushed aside means ignored and never completed, left it. The text was published posthumously. Posthumously, you know, a child born after his father's death or a book published after the author's death. That is called posthumously. So the text was published posthumously in 1840 in essays, letters from abroad. So Shelley distinguishes the defense of poetry. Shelley distinguishes between measured and unmeasured language. Shelley distinguishes between measured and unmeasured language. The former being poetry, measured means poetry. The former means former, and former always stands opposite to latter. Okay. So the former being poetry, which uses meter, that is, you measure out the syllables per line, and the latter being prose, unmeasured. Measured means poetry, and unmeasured means prose. So it's clear to you. Poetry is superior to prose, according to Shelley. Poetry is superior to prose, even though poetry is superior to prose, even though both use languages, because we find languages in poetry and also in prose, but poetry is superior to prose, according to Shelley. Because poetry also, because poetry also taps into the possibilities of a sound. The language of a poet has never affected a certain uniform and harmonious recurrence of a sound, without which it were not poetry. Shelley also makes a distinction. Shelley also makes a distinction. So means now you knew that Shelley distinguishes between measured and unmeasured. Measured means poetry, unmeasured means prose. But he gives much more emphasis to poetry prose than prose because of many reasons. Shelley also makes a distinction between storytelling and poetry. Okay, storytelling and poetry, arguing, arguing. Uh, he speaks, arguing he speaks. A story of a particular facts is as a mirror which obscures and distorts that which should be beautiful. Poetry is a mirror which makes beautiful. Poetry is a mirror which makes beautiful that which is distorted. Poetry thus reflects the world like a mirror, and what does show in a way that renders the distorted image. Indeed, poetry can make us see the distorted means distorted. Distorted means pulled or twisted out of a shape. Twisted out of shape. Pulled or twisted out of a shape. Indeed, poetry can make us see the world in a new light. Indeed, poetry can make us see the world in a new light, making it richer and more beautiful. Making it richer and more beautiful. So according to Shelley, poetry, because you see, now Shelley gives much more importance to poetry than prose. Also poetry than storytelling. Why? Now Shelley speaks, poetry is the record of the best and happiest moments. Poetry is the record of the best and happiest moments. Well, according to Shelley, poetry is the record of the best and happiest moments of the happiest, best minds. In defense of poetry, in defense of poetry, Shelley attempts to prove that poets are philosophers. Okay, in defense of poetry, Shelley attempts to prove that poets are philosophers. Poets are philosophers, that they are the creators and protectors of moral and civil laws. Understand? So Shelley speaks that poets are philosophers, that they are the creators and protectors of moral and civil laws, and that if it were not for poets, you see how strongly Shelley asserts that uh, if it were not for poets, scientists could not have developed either their theories or their inventions. Okay, so here uh, Shelley uh, affirms that if it were not for poets, scientists could not have developed either their theories or their inventions. So poets introduced and maintain morality. Means he just has prestige to poets. Poets reign the supreme. Poets are regarded as the topmost persons in the world. Okay, so nowadays scientists have developed their theories and inventions. It is because of the poets. So defense of poetry is an unfinished essay. So as earlier I told, it's an unfinished essay by P.B. Shelley, written in February and March of 1821, that the poet puts aside and never completed. The text was published posthumously in 1814 essays. Its final sentence expresses whose that defense of poetry, uh, its final sentence expresses Shelley's famous proposition that poets are the unacknowledged legislators. Poets are the unacknowledged legislator. Legislator means unacknowledged means existing or having taken place but not accepted. Unacknowledged means recognized or admitted to. Existing or having taken place but not accepted of a person or their work. Deserving but not receiving praise or recognition. Means deserving. You are deserving but not receiving praise or recognition of a person's or their work. Suppose you have done something, you have produced something, okay, you have written something, you are deserving to get some prize, but not receiving praise or recognition. Okay, so on means that is uh, poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. Legislator means a person who makes laws or a member of the legislative body. Shelley wrote Shelley wrote a defense of poetry in response to Four Ages of Poetry, an essay by his friend Thomas Love Peacock. Thomas Love Peacock. In the Four Ages of Poetry, Four Ages of Poetry means that is Shelley wrote a defense of poetry in response to the Four Ages of Poetry, an essay by his friend Thomas Love Peacock. In the Four Ages of Poetry, Peacock satirically argues, means it's Thomas Love Peacock, his friend, in the Four Ages of Poetry, Peacock satirically argues that poetry is no longer needed amid the great technological and scientific advancements of the industrial age. Means it states that um, we should never run after poetry because nowadays we experience a lot of scientific and technological advancements because it's an industrial age. So why should we go in quest of poetry? He adds that poetry was once useful for awakening the intellect of society. He adds that poetry was once useful, but not now because it's an industrial age. Why should we think of poetry? So he adds that poetry was once useful for awakening the intellect of society, but now humanity has advanced beyond it. Peacock also said the poets of his era were derivative, which showed the downfall of poetry. Derivative means imitative, unoriginal. Means you see uh, how criticizing, how Shelley's friend Peacock is criticizing the poets vehemently. Sure, what does he speak? What is his opinion? That Peacock also said the poets of his era where derivative means imagine, means unoriginal. Derivative means imitative or unoriginal. Means they never write anything of their own. Rather, they collect everything from the flora and fauna of nature. What they see, what they personalize, what they observe, that they put forth in their poems. So that poets of his era were derivative, which showed the downfall of a poetry. So responding to Peacock's critics means Peacock's opinion, because Peacock told, what did Peacock tell? Peacock told that poets are were derivative, means they are imitative, not original, unoriginal. They were that unoriginal. So responding to Peacock's critics in A Defense of Poetry, Shelley argues that poetry is imperative, means it's must to society. Does this by first differentiating. He does this by first differentiating differentiating between a region and imagination, and then he claims that region serves imagination. Region to imagination as the instrument is to agent. Means a poet Shelley speaks that a region is much more important than imagination. Means Shelley told poetry is very, very important. Without poetry, we will never think of uh, the science. Scientists have got everything from the poets. It is according to Shelley. But yet, that his friend Peacock had told the poets are unoriginal, derivatives, means that imitatives. So, responding to that his opinion, Shelley wrote, argues that poetry is important to society. He does this by first differentiating between region and imagination. And then he claims, Shelley claims, that region serves imagination. Region is to imagination as the instrument is to the agent, as the body is to the spirit, as the shadow to the substance. Okay, so in these lines, the Shelley challenge Peacock's writings. The region is to imagination as the instrument to the agent, as the body to the spirit, as the shadow to the substance. So Shelley argues that poetry is mimetic. Poetry is mimetic. Mimetic means that relating to or constituting or habitually practicing mimesis, constituting or habitually relating to or constituting or habitually. That is mimetic. Poetry is mimetic. That is, it reflects the real world. In the early days of civilization, in the early days of civilization, men imitate natural objects, observing the order and the rhythm of these things, and from his impulse was poetry born. Reason and imagination are both important faculties in the poet. Reason, he tells us, is logical, Reason, he tells us, is logical thought, whereas imagination is perceiving things and noticing the similarities between things. It is through reason, but also through imagination, that we can identify beauty in the world. And from such a perception or a realization are great civilizations made. Poets then are makers of civilization itself, as Shelley argues. Okay, so here Shelley argues that poets are the makers of civilization itself, as Shelley argues. Having established that reason is second to imagination, Shelley defines poetry as the expression of imagination. He claims that all works of the imaginations are poetry. Poetry are Poets are critical to society because their works encapsulate universal truth and forecast a vision of the future for generations to come. Finally, poets must transcend, so to come to an end, finally poets must transcend their own time and place and work to be the legislators of mankind. By this, by this, he means that poets' influence extends beyond the realm of art and emotion. Through language, poets shape the social and linguistic order, thus paving the way for social civil society. Means here we came to know that in Shelley's defense of poetry, how uh, Shelley defended. Defense means the act of defending from or resisting attack. Act of defending from. So here Shelley defended the poetry by opining or giving or stating that a region and uh, that is called imagination. So he stated that region is much more important than imagination. Region is much more important than imagination. In these ways, we just come to an end of today's uh, discussion. And tomorrow to start, do you know what is to be taught tomorrow? Do you know? Next discussion, what is the topic? Hello?
No, sir.
New
Criticism.
criticism.
New
Yes,
criticism.
new criticism.
New criticism.
Yes. So till that, goodbye. And tomorrow to start the same time uh, uh, with the topic new criticism. Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you,
Thank you,
sir.
sir.
Thank you,
Good
sir.
night, sir.
Thank you, sir.